Hello everybody, Vector here. Today I wanted to talk about an interesting topic. So this one will be a little bit more complex, so I'm doing this in VR chat so I don't have to edit a 30-minute long video with a PNG tuber. But when I went around on YouTube, I noticed that there was actually some very few videos that talked about Smash's game design. As in, there was a lot of videos, like especially from Sakurai, about how Smash was designed, but very few videos that talked about how Smash was designed as a fighting game. Like you'll have a lot of videos go over the design of fighting games, like for example the way that anime fighters, the way how air dashes affected how the game functions, but very few on the ones that talked about Smash's mechanics. And I think that this is very interesting. So just as some preface, I've been a competitive Smash player for several years. Haven't been playing recently, but I've been very involved in multiple fighting games. Made my own fighting game, released on Steam and sold and everything. So I know a little bit of what I'm talking about, especially as someone who is working as a game designer. So I guess we can begin on the most simple parts, which are, one, the goals of Smash Bros. And how the game controls. So there's a video that Sakurai made for Smash Bros. 64, the first one created, and he talked about why he made the game. And it's a pretty well-known fact by now that basically Sakurai was an avid fighting game player, but he wanted to make a video game or a fighting game that anyone could play. So the main goal of Smash Bros., even before it had the Nintendo characters or items or anything, was just how do we make a fighting game that is accessible for beginners to play, while also generally being a good fighting game for expert players. So this isn't something that he talks about often, but I did rewatch his video on Smash 64 recently, and he does actually emphasize the point that Smash should be played however you wanted to play it. So Smash is a fighting game that deserves a whole video of its own. I won't get into that too much here, but it's a fighting game on Wikipedia. Core Gaming made a video on every fighting game genre, and platform fighters are on there. I won't be arguing about this stuff, but basically, Smash is a fighting game. It is considered its own subgenre under platform fighters, so most of what I'll talk about here is it applies to platform fighters in general. But there are many things that make a platform fighter a platform fighter. And we'll be ignoring stuff like PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale for now because that has completely different mechanics and wasn't the most well-received platform fighter anyway. But we'll start with the controls. Most characters in most platform fighters have pretty simplified controls. Street Fighter has like 6 attack buttons and you have to do motion inputs or charge inputs in order to do special moves. But in Smash Bros, we just have 2 attack buttons, which is one, the attack button for normal attacks, and 2 for special attacks. So this is very intuitive for beginners already. The attack button is usually the quicker, safer, less rewarding buttons, and special moves are usually, at least to a beginner's eyes, the higher reward, higher risk, etc. So for example, if you play Captain Falcon, you might be able to do down tilt as like a sort of poke. It's not a great poke, but it's a poke. And then you'll compare that to Falcon Punch or Raptor Boost. And those are super risky moves that can kill, but they're very difficult to land against an opponent who knows how to dodge their attacks and everything. One downside of the control scheme is that every single character has to have basically the exact same moveset. Every single character needs to have a jab. They have to have a forward tilt, a down tilt, up tilt, forward smash, up smash, down smash, etc. And that can mean that a lot of characters will have these moves that are just basically completely useless. I think in traditional fighters, people usually refer to these moves as combo fodder, but in Smash Bros, the way that combos work is different, so it doesn't really work in the same way. So the control scheme is generally pretty intuitive. The one that I've seen people struggle with the most are smash attacks. These don't exist in any other game, and you have to hit the control stick and the A button at the same time, which is a little bit unintuitive. There are alternate ways to do smash attacks, like pressing A and B at the same time, which is part of the default control scheme, so we can give it that, because having the normal and special button pressed at the same time to do a stronger attack is very intuitive. So in general, I have very few complaints about the control scheme. That's very simple, that makes sense. But mentioning combos, so how do combos work exactly? The way that it works in traditional fighters usually is that you use animation cancels, so or links too. So the way that a link works is, for example, if you hit an attack that is +5, then you can use any button that's frame 5 or faster, and it will link properly. This is somewhat intuitive, but it's very difficult to figure out combos because you just kind of have to learn them or study them or search up frame data, and it can be very difficult to figure those out. The other way is to do special cancels, or animation cancels in general. So for example, if I land with an aerial, then I can do a ground attack, and then I can cancel that ground attack into a special attack. These are super unintuitive, other than maybe jumping in with aerials, which is very easy to learn. The way that special cancels work, when I first went into Street Fighter, it was very confusing to me because there's no logical reason for why normal attacks can cancel into special attacks. It's just something that you just kind of have to know when you're in the genre. So the way that combos work in Smash is that you juggle the opponent, basically. Juggles exist in other games, but the way that you're able to influence your direction of trajectory, which is DI, directional influence, makes it completely different from any other fighting game, basically. In Street Fighter, if you get hit by one move, then the opponent just has to do the exact same inputs every single time, and the combo is absolutely 100% guaranteed. There's some fighting games where you can get thrown off a little bit, like in Tekken, since it's a 3D game, sometimes you can be misaligned, and that can lead to some combos dropped. There's also in anime fighters, there's usually some sort of option called burst, which is just a very risky attack that breaks you out of combos immediately. That is intuitive, but it is very specific, and there usually has to be specific types of meters and resources that get put into having a burst option. So the way that Smash does it is very unique, but it's also intuitive. So if you get hit upwards, you're able to influence your direction a little bit left or to the right. And depending on which way you DI, that can either affect how the opponent follows up with their combo. Sometimes they'll have to dash forward first before jumping into the air, or sometimes it can influence the way that their follow-ups are entirely. Maybe if someone up throws you, then they have to choose to either use forward or back air depending on which way you do that, which way you DI. So this leads to a very interesting dynamic where on one hand, doing combos just isn't a memorization game. So in Street Fighter, if I hit this exact sequence of moves, then I will get the combo every single time. And those combos exist in Smash, but most of the time you have to adapt to the opponent in some way after hitting one or two attacks. On one hand, this makes it so that it is very easy for new players to not get so caught up with combos. I'll have a lot of friends who don't want to get into a fighting game because they feel like they have to learn some sort of bread and butter combo just to be able to play the game. Whereas in Smash, even if you don't get a guaranteed juggle, you're able to keep the opponent in the air, for example, and that will continue to help you push your offense, even if it's not guaranteed. The other thing that affects combos is health. So this is a very interesting thing where before I played Smash, I was very, very confused by the percentage system. So it is a very interesting decision because you have all these very intuitive things where combos are intuitive. You just hit the opponent until they hit the ground, basically. You have a control scheme that's super simple, but you also have this health bar, which is not existent in any other genre. It's also confusing in general that there's a percentage system because it goes past 100%, but generally, higher number is better in a video game. So it's very strange to have, first of all, a game where being at a higher percent means that you're at greater risk of dying, and also the fact that there's no health bar in the game whatsoever. The reason why Sakurai designed it like this is, well, there's multiple parts to it. First of all, it is actually pretty intuitive that hitting the opponent outside of the screen means they get killed. This is very unique, but it is very intuitive because it's a very clear visual indicator of how close you are to dying and when you're actually dead. The other reason why the percentage system exists is because it changes how combos function. So when you're at a higher percent, then that means that the way that your follow-ups and combos work will be completely different. This is a very interesting decision for multiple reasons. One thing is that you'd expect combos to drop more often because it's less reliable this way. So like I said, in Street Fighter, you'll get the same combo, the same every single time as long as you just hit the buttons properly. But in Smash, you can do the exact same combo and it will just straight up miss because of the percentage being a little bit off, for example. So it is up to the players to memorize these percentages, but then there's also weight classes and gravity and fall speed, sorry, not gravity. And those all influence the way that a character can be juggled and comboed. So on one hand, this means that better players don't always get rewarded for, or better in quotation mark, better players who memorize their combos won't necessarily be ahead because there's a higher chance that they drop their combo in some way. But on the other hand, it means that there's way more memorization than a typical fighting game. Because if in Street Fighter I do a combo, it'll basically work on every single character in the game and work exactly the same. But in Smash, if I do a combo on a fast faller, then they might completely break a combo that would work on a floaty. Or if I do a character on a heavy character, then there might be wider percent ranges than on a lighter character. So this makes it so that, ironically, it could be considered way, way more complex than the average fighting game. While on the other hand, it also kind of benefits players of all skill levels because other than specific strings of attacks, not everything is guaranteed to work unless you just memorize every single character and every single percent range and every single combo. So another thing that I'd like to add about the health system is that it leads to a lot of interesting consequences because the only way that you die is getting hit off of the screen. So Smash Bros. Has an interesting side effect where certain moves will basically never ever kill the opponent. For example, if we say, okay, Smash attacks are the more powerful attacks, you can play a character like Mario, and Fireball, Cape, those will never ever kill the opponent. They have extremely low knockback, basically no knockback scaling. They can do some damage, but they will never kill the opponent. So it actually leads to more memorization where the player has to know which moves can kill, when will those moves kill, which ones will kill earlier, how much risk is involved for those moves. Whereas if I play a game like Tekken, for example, which is an extremely complicated game, I can just say, okay, my opponent is really low on health. I'm just going to hit the down kick button, hit them low, and that's just going to kill them because they're on low health and any move will kill. This also leads to one of my favorite consequences for Smash's game design, which is that in most fighting games, the way that you want to close out a round is with the safest move possible. So the player in the lead, will usually want to use less risky options because basically anything can kill a low health player. It doesn't matter how low damage it is. If they're just 1 health, then any attack that does 1 tick of damage will kill them. But in Smash, even though there are safe kill moves, most kill moves in the game you'll actually have to go through some risk to do, or gain some sort of advantage to be able to do it. The most obvious example of this would be smash attacks, which are riskier attacks that are usually unsafe on block. And in order to kill the opponent, you can't just, use a jab and that won't kill them. You have to do some form of risk, like a smash attack or maybe some sort of aerial, or some sort of special attack, which are often pretty unsafe on block or whiff. So this actually leads to a sort of built-in comeback mechanic, where even if you're super ahead, if you can't land that killing blow on the opponent, they can just rack up damage on you and end up turning it even, basically. But this is also why characters will usually be found to be pretty high tier if they have some sort of safe way of killing the opponent. The other really funny consequence of this is that the only win condition you have for killing the opponent is to get them outside of the screen, and that includes the bottom of the screen too. So unlike most fighting games, there is a way where you can instantly kill the opponent, which is to just spike them while they're outside of the stage. Or this opponent can even accidentally kill themselves at 0%. And this will happen multiple times in tournament, where someone will SD just because they were careless or messed up something. But it also means that players are also allowed to gimp each other, which means that if they're off stage, they're able to use weaker attacks to kill the opponent. These are all very safe ways of killing the opponent, actually, though it is a bit character dependent. So this is another way that there is a comeback mechanic, because if I played like a game like Tekken, for example, if the opponent is at 100% health, he's at 100% health. I need to deal attacks that will deplete his entire health bar, otherwise I can't win. But in Smash, I can just hit someone for 30%, hit them with a decently powered spike, and most of the time that will straight up kill them. And in platform fighters that have ledge hawking, you can even kill them before that. If you gimp them and then grab the ledge before they do, then that will kill them instantly if they're not able to recover. These comeback mechanics are very common for Nintendo games, but it's very interesting to me because people don't really think of gimping and spikes as like a comeback mechanic, when it very, very much is, and it's very much not present in most fighting games you play. The closest would maybe be ring outs, which I don't know too much about the games that feature ring outs, but from what I've heard, they don't seem to be very common in competitive play. Whereas in Smash, it's very common actually, even newer games with ledge hogging stuff like Rivals, where you're just able to gimp someone, and if they're slightly careless, then you can just grab the ledge and kill them at zero. So far that should paint a pretty clear picture of Smash Bros, where it's aiming to help beginner players, and it does that with a simple control scheme. The mechanics have built-in ways for the opponent to come back, which is kind of Mario Kart-ish almost, where are forms of almost rubber banding, where players who are behind are still able to come back ahead just due to the way that the percentage system and the platform mechanics work. So even a lot of it is unorthodox and requires a lot of learning. Tons and tons of new players to Smash will just straight up SD because they don't know how to recover. Once you get to a beginner middle level, things actually even out like really, really well, I think. Even without items, there's just a lot of ways for players to be able to come back and stuff. With the inclusion of DI and other combo breaking mechanics, there's also a lot of room for there to be interplay between the player and opponent, even if one is at the advantage and the other is at the disadvantage. You can cause a player to completely drop their combo if you DI correctly, or survive killing blows longer if you just DI properly. So it makes the game very interactive in a way that a lot of fighting games aren't really on the same level of. And the last thing I want to talk about are the platforming mechanics, because platform fighters are partly platformers. And most people talk about this in terms of, or I wouldn't say talk about it, but I think they just assume that it being a platformer is just kind of an aesthetic thing. Like, oh, the game is a lot more smoother and easier to control because most people have played platformers. And if you just put that in a fighting game, then it'll make it easier for new players to play the game. But it actually has like unimaginable consequences. The air dasher genre, also called anime fighters, they have been built out of a singular movement option, and that's air dashing. The King of Fighters series is very different from Street Fighter because it allows you to have different types of jumps, and just allowing the player to have full aerial control whenever they leave the ground is huge on how the game is played and how it has to be balanced. One example is that, for example, in Street Fighter, most characters, once they jump, they're not able to adjust their trajectory at all. And this might seem clunky to some people, but it's really important to the gameplay. Because, for example, if I'm playing Guile and I have two special moves, which is one, Sonic Boom, a projectile, that forces people to jump because they want to avoid the projectile. And then my second special move is Flash Kick, which anti-airs the opponent and punishes them for jumping. So the thing is that this playstyle for Guile to only have two special moves, it only really works because traditional fighters have very predictable jump arcs. So that makes it so that when I predict the opponent jumping in, then I will be able to anti-air them every single time. Otherwise, Guile doesn't really function at all as a character. Meanwhile, in Smash, you can jump forward and then you can air dodge back. You can jump forward and then double jump again. You can jump forward, air dodge to become completely invincible in the air, and then get back to the ground with an aerial. There's a lot of different interactions that you can have, and it makes it a lot more sort of gray area. This feeds a lot more into Smash's mechanics again, of kind of adding a lot of gray area, so it's more difficult for it to be like a solved game. which can kind of make it more difficult for beginners to figure out how the game works, but also makes it so that certain advantages that stronger players have can also be less apparent. However, this is also mostly just hypothetically speaking. In practice, the way that they got around this is by making hitboxes just absolutely massive usually. So I would compare, for example, if you took any Street Fighter character and just did their quickest attack, which is just a jab, like a light jab, that attack goes nowhere. You can basically only use it if you're point blank with the opponent. Then you get the jabs from some characters in Smash, like Marth, and that is an enormous hitbox. It can possibly even anti-air, and it's also just completely safe, completely disjointed. And Smash Bros has these disjointed hitboxes that usually fighting games will just avoid like the plague, because they'll just make the game straight up unplayable. But since Smash is a platform fighter, it gives everyone platforming mechanics. Basically, every character has absolutely insane amounts of movement, which might sound a bit funny to compare someone like Ganondorf to having an insane amount of movement. But if you compare it to any other fighting game, you just have options that just characters are not allowed to have a lot of the time. So I guess the gist is that even though having platformer mechanics allows the games to have more fluid, more intuitive movement, it also makes the fighting aspects a little bit harder sometimes. Because in Street Fighter, if you jump in the air, that's always a huge risk. But sometimes certain Smash characters can actually be safer in the air than they are on the ground, even though they're literally not allowed to shield in the air. And that's because partly of the air dodge mechanics, but also because of the way how they're able to manipulate their movement in a way that's way more fluid than any other fighting game. I remember hearing about Melty Blood, for example. Characters are allowed to jump, double jump, and I think air dash all within the same jump, and manipulate their movement in a way that's way more than a traditional fighting game character is allowed to access. But even that is like almost nothing compared to Smash. With Diddy Kong, for example, I could jump, double jump, use side B to monkey flip one direction, and then use popgun cancel to go the other direction. And then I'm able to air dodge before I get to the ground. And those sort of options are just, well, okay, it's not normal. Not everyone is Diddy Kong, but they're a lot more normal than they are compared to a character in a traditional fighter. And sometimes those are required because that is how characters make it back from the stage, but that also makes it so that even simple neutral interactions can have a lot of sort of mind games where it's actually very difficult to predict exactly how to respond to the opponent. But again, that's usually not actually as pronounced as it might seem like, just because characters have a wide range of tools to deal with the situations. I might be able to do all those options as Diddy Kong, but if the opponent is playing Lucina and uses forward air, then there's not much I can do about that. So yeah, I think that's about all I wanted to talk about. There is a lot to talk about Smash really, but I hope this was at least vaguely interesting to someone out there. And I really do hope that people look at Smash more seriously as a real fighting game, especially as more platform fighters like Rivals 2 come out that really show people what the genre is capable of. So I think that's about it. Thank you all for watching and see y'all later.